Anytime a newcomer or naysayer that has only heard Alkan's infamous virtuoso works claims that Alkan only cared about transcendental virtuosity, difficulty, and endless torrents of notes over musical substance, one of the first pieces I recommend to counter those claims is his Nocturne No. 1 in B major, Opus 22. While only my opinion, I believe this is Alkan's best, shorter, lyrical, and not too difficult work. It features his compositional strengths at their best while successfully hiding his limitations and weaknesses. I don't believe there is a single moment, not even a single note, in this piece that is less than great, and whenever one discusses great nocturnes by composers other than Chopin, this piece most certainly deserves a mention. Thankfully, this nocturne is actually one of the better known works by Alkan, largely due to it being a contrast to his more notorious pieces like the minor key etudes. We will discuss it and analyze why it is so great, but first, a little history. I am not sure if the composition date of this piece is known, but the publication year is. Here is some info from page 8 of William Alexander Eddy's book Charles Valentin Alkan, His Life and His Music. Alkan published this piece in 1844, which was a particularly significant year for Alkan. In 1844, he was invited by the Paris Conservatoire to judge a new potential cantor, Samuel Naumburg. Alkan later composed two Hebrew choral works for Naumburg, a setting of Psalm 150, Hallelujah, and a setting of Etz Chaim Hi, or The Tree of Life. I actually conducted both of these works in my master's choral conducting recital, which you can hear on this very YouTube channel. Alkan also began teaching his son Delaborde, and he returned to performing publicly after a hiatus of several years. This hiatus was possibly due to the birth of Delaborde, whom Alkan fathered outside of marriage to an unknown woman, so likely one of his students. Alkan primarily taught women who were in well-off families. But in this return to concertizing, his recitals included his own Alleluia, Opus 25, Gigue and Air in the Ancient Style, Opus 24, which Eddy's book erroneously lists as Opus 21. Opus 21 is actually his Grand Duo Concertant for violin and piano. The Saltarella, Opus 23, and the Nocturne in B major, Opus 22. All of these works were published in 1844, but if I read IMSLP and Mark Weiner's liner notes correctly, it seems that not all of them went through the same publisher. The Nocturne, along with the Saltarella, were published through Schott, but the Gigue and Air, along with the Alleluia, went through different publishers. While the Saltarella, Opus 23, and also L'Avant, Opus 15, No. 2, historically achieved a bit of popularity for at least some time, his Nocturne, Opus 22, is one of his most played works in modern times. This is no surprise, as it features Alkan's skill with melody, phrasing, harmony, form, pacing, contrast, voicing, all at his very finest. Let's begin. The tempo is marked andantino with no metronome marking. I hold the opinion that many of his metronome markings are just too fast, so I am relieved that he did not bother to put a specific number on this one. In the varying recordings that exist, you will hear a moderate variety of tempos, but people almost never go to the extremes in either direction, so most recordings range from just shy of to just beyond 6 minutes. Alkan also writes dolce, meaning sweetly. It begins with a theme that quotes the first four notes of Chopin's Nocturne in B major, opus 9, number 3, specifically the ascending major sixth gesture of the F sharp pickup to the higher D sharp on the downbeat. And the little ascending figure at the end of measure 4 in Alkan's reminds me a bit of the ascending figure at the end of the aforementioned Chopin Nocturne at the end of measure 8. Of course, Alkan was well acquainted with Chopin and his music by this time, as they were neighbors and close friends in Paris. Alkan often composes short pieces or extended passages in longer pieces based off single musical ideas, motifs, and rhythms. But he doesn't do that here. In the four measures of the opening theme, each measure features a different rhythm, and it's not solely built on scales or arpeggios a la Beethoven. It's a bona fide, cantabile, lyrical melody. If you didn't know, Alkan actually did this a lot, and very well. I would be happy to recommend many more of these works to you if you're interested. But back to my point. While composing in the former style is not inherently bad, it can be limiting. And when done a whole lot, it is not surprising when not everything is equally inspired and successful. But Alkan avoids this altogether by composing a lyrical and quite tender melody. One thing that has always struck me odd about this melody is that, like many phrases by Alkan, it is 4 bars. However, and this is merely my own observation, it has never felt like a typical 4-bar phrase. When we look at the score, we see D sharp on beat 1 of measures 1, 2, and 3. But notice how the D sharp in the second measure is not the emphasized note of the measure, or more importantly, of the phrase. Sure, there will be some emphasis on the D sharp in measure 1, as that starts things off and along with the bass setting our foundation. However, in measure 2, if there is a note we are kind of going for, it would be this high F sharp. More often than not, people crescendo a bit to this note, but sometimes people do the opposite to be a bit different, I suppose. But regardless, we know that the F sharp is the money note of this measure, as well as the highest note of this phrase. The D sharp in measure 3 likely shouldn't be accented, but it is still an arrival point, even if only a temporary arrival point since the phrase continues. Note that there's a fourth D sharp in this phrase, but the bass moves from F sharp, a major 6 under, to E, a major 7th under. This is such a nice little moment of tension and dissonance. Both the first and second statement of the opening theme resolve on a B major chord, but this is no issue. The first time, Alkan just uses a quick 5-7 to turn back around to the tonic again. But the second time, the concluding B major chord suddenly becomes the 4 to our new tonal center, F sharp major, the 5 of the original key. Alkan isn't always adept to adventure out with chromaticism and unpredictable harmony like most of his Romantic era colleagues. However, he still handles harmony and chord progressions convincingly and expressively here. In measure 1, this chord on beat 2 is just a diminished triad that ultimately serves as 2 neighboring tones to the chords on beats 1 and 3. Nothing fancy, but still lovely and tender. After the statements of the opening theme, the music directly modulates to the 5, F sharp major. While modulating from 1 to 5 is not groundbreaking by any means, I like how he doesn't do it with some sort of 5 of 5 chord, but instead with a direct 4 to 1, almost plagal action in the new key. While simple, it still sounds quite refreshing. Like the first theme, the second theme does not resort to Alkan's favorite same motif over and over again tactic, but instead another tried and true melodic device many composers employed throughout the years: 2 plus 2 plus 4. Sometimes also 1 plus 1 plus 2, but in this case it's the former. Measures 9 and 10 state the new theme. Measures 11 and 12 repeat the new theme with a different harmony on the final beat, and then measures 13 through 16 flesh out the theme. Alkan refuses to spell enharmonically, so this can be a bit frustrating to sight read. Measure 13 begins with a D sharp minor chord, which is our new key. This harmony is the minor 6 chord in F sharp major, and also the minor 3 chord in our original key of B major. Of course, the 5 of D sharp minor is A sharp major, the harmony the phrase arrives at in measure 16. I don't think anybody would have protested had Alkan somewhere switched the D sharp minor spelling to E flat minor, then B flat major in measure 14, C half diminished in F dominant 7 in measure 15, and then B flat major in measure 16. Those are pretty agreeable chords to read. But no, it has to be D sharp minor, A sharp major, yuck, B sharp half diminished, super yuck, E sharp dominant 7, super duper yuck, and A sharp major, again, yuck. Enharmonic spelling aside, it actually isn't difficult to play once you get it in your fingers. After building up with back and forth 1-6-4 and 5-7 harmonies, the next 4 measures feature 2 hemiolas, one per group of 2 measures each. In measures 21 and 22, the hemiola rhythm is a continuation of 2 beats from the rhythm in measure 20, and the hemiola rhythm in measures 23 and 24 feature a chromatic walk down, alternating in 6 between 2 separate voices, while A sharp remains a pedal tone in the bass. From here, we now return to our home key of B major, and the opening theme repeats. This A sharp in the bass resolving up to B, E natural in the soprano resolving down to D sharp, and G natural in the alto resolving down to F sharp, all bringing us back to our original key of B major, is just utterly satisfying. Wait, how did Alkan return to the home key? I thought we were in D sharp minor. Well, at the end of the back and forth between D sharp minor, the 1, and A sharp 7, the 5-7, note the F sharp in the melody on the downbeat of measure 20, the E sharps that follow on beats 2 and 3, and how the next note is D sharp, first as a passing tone in measure 20, but more established on the downbeat of measure 21 with an ornament and as a quarter note on beat 2. A 3-note descending action of F sharp, E sharp, D sharp. Now, look in measures 23 and 24. The top voice is F sharp, E sharp, but instead of a whole step, now a half step to E natural, and it flows perfectly into the downbeat of measure 25, now another half step down to D sharp that we were looking for, and the D sharp is the third of our home key B major. What perplexes me about measures 23 and 24 is why Alkan spelled the notes how he did in the alto voice. Why use a G double sharp in measure 23 instead of A natural? E sharp to G sharp is a major 6th, and so is E natural to G natural. So why wouldn't A natural following F sharp follow this major 6th trend instead of some sort of weird diminished 7th? Would A natural against the A sharp in the bass somehow break a convention that a G double sharp solves? Well, it's not a huge deal. Going on at measure 25, Alkan basically repeats the first 24 measures, but he keeps the 6ths going, now blocked instead of alternating. And he even keeps the 6th in the chromatic figure at the end of measure 28, making it much more difficult to play well. This is probably the little lick one will need to practice the most if they play this piece. When he comes back to the A theme a third time, it is in sixths again. But the second statement of the theme receives an almost Chopinesque elaboration, though he mercifully keeps it as just 16th notes over the 8th notes to be played as expressively as possible with some tasteful rubato, instead of some seemingly random odd number of small print notes. I suppose the more I think about it, Alkan does this elaboration more in the vein of John Field instead of Chopin, as Field did these kinds of expressive and stretched, yet measured, melodic elaborations in his nocturnes, not unmeasured free-flowing cadenzas like Chopin. This concludes the A section. There is no fancy transition to the B section, but the piece doesn't call for it. While the final phrase of the A section ends on a root inversion 1 chord, Alkan subtly makes it a first inversion chord with D sharp in the bass at the very end on the final beat, which is separated mid-measure by an ending double bar line. Something Alkan does quite often, including several times in this piece. This is one of countless examples of Alkan using unconventional notational techniques that actually kind of make sense. This sets up the B major chord as a 4 chord for our new key of E major, especially with that D sharp in the bass, if ever so briefly, maybe encouraging the pianist to employ a little pull and push with the tempo on the final beat of this measure and the first beat of the next. The theme of the B section of the piece begins with a pickup that starts with the same note the A section ends on, B. On the downbeat, we have an ascending scale followed by a fall of a seventh, notably the opposite of a second, which would otherwise give us the seventh note in the scale all in one go. This happens again diatonically down a second, and then we get 2 leaps upward with a longer descending motion, and the dotted pickup now being the concluding part of this longer phrase. Oh look, it was 2 plus 2 plus 4 again. And since it worked nicely here, Alkan decides to do it again. He just handles the 4 part of the 2 plus 2 plus 4 a bit differently this time. Nice. 2 iterations of that was enough for him, and he also got tired of E major, so he moves to the relative C sharp minor and states the first 2 measures of the B theme in minor. This time, no 2 plus 2 plus 4, but instead, Alkan finally decides to unleash the beast. And by beast, I just mean repeating the same musical idea over and over again, as I've previously mentioned. He's finally doing it. However, this is actually the perfect place in the piece to do this. The change to C sharp minor, along with louder dynamics, mark the highest amount of drama in this piece so far, even more than the 2 statements of the second theme in the A section. And thankfully, he doesn't get too carried away here. Sometimes Alkan goes on seemingly forever, making me wonder when he's finally going to finish his point. I'm looking at you, Scherzo Focoso. But here, he only states this 2-bar theme 8 times, and he makes it convincing by how he contours the larger phrases. In the second half of this 16-bar excerpt, he echoes the melody in the left hand like a new voice or instrument we haven't heard yet. What a great way to add variety and interest, and this again is the perfect moment to do something like this. Alkan's pacing throughout this nocturne is truly incredible. This is an example of what many call Alkan's orchestral way of writing for piano. Big block chords and distinguishable voices that must all be independently voiced, balanced, and brought out at the right times. But now, in the second half of this statement of the C sharp minor theme, Alkan suddenly modulates down a whole step. No preparation for this modulation, he just Schubert's right into it. Yet again, Alkan did not reinvent the wheel harmonically by suddenly going down a whole step. I immediately think of the beginning of Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata, directly modulating down a whole step. But this is in the climactic moment of this piece, and this sudden modulation, along with the marking of con dolcezza, with sweetness, seems to actually translate to get quieter, considering that's how basically everybody plays it in measure 85. But that's fine. This is a truly special moment, and Alkan isn't done with his tricks, because starting in measure 85, we actually get a rare 3-bar phrase before Alkan transitions back into one more instance of 2 plus 2 plus 4 while still maintaining the echo effect between the two hands, now beginning with the left hand instead of the right, and with the marking sempre piano e con grazia, always soft and with the grace. The final 4 bars of this phrase continue to get quieter and then slow down before returning to the A section and the original key of B major. The B section ended in D sharp minor, which is a harmony that exists in B major, the minor 3 chord. So it isn't too hard to use the F sharp found in both D sharp minor and B major as a common tone and quickly insert an F sharp 7 chord to be the 5-7 of the new key, and then boom, back to B major, our home key. Here, Alkan uses a little bit of melodic variation in the second theme of the A section, which makes sense since this is the 3rd time we have heard this theme now. When the first theme of the A section returns in measure 120, Alkan changes the left hand to now play the 2 plus 2 plus 4 theme of the B section again, something that Alkan often did in his shorter ternary form pieces. While again, not necessarily revolutionary, it is very effective and welcome, particularly in this moment of the piece. Again, a testament to how well Alkan paced this piece. We also get another 3-bar phrase, or part of a phrase, in measures 124 through 126, with the next phrase beginning seemingly a bar early in 127. The ending is especially tender. It is, in my opinion, the best take on the 2 plus 2 plus 4 concept in this piece. Alkan states a short idea based off the 2nd through the 6th notes of the opening theme, then again with the right hand going higher and the left hand ending lower on E instead of G natural, and then a 3rd time with the right hand going even higher and the left even lower to C sharp, which steps in the respective hands down to F sharp and up to the D sharp in the next measure. But also during this 3rd statement, Alkan states the opening theme in thirds under the top voice. And then to conclude, 2 final chords, the top notes of the chords, F sharp and D sharp, the first 2 notes of the melody of the piece. What a nice way to bring it all full circle. As I said before, Alkan never reinvents the wheel in this piece, but the wheel he uses is top-notch. All of his compositional methods are conventional techniques, but they are done to great effect. No individual section ever wears out its welcome before moving on, and the entire piece feels cohesive and consistent from the very first note to the very last chord. I truly do not believe there is a single weak or questionable moment in this work. Well, I may question some of his enharmonic spelling choices, but it still sounds absolutely beautiful. Alkan demonstrates great development, pacing, and sense of structure while consistently executing great phrasing, inspiring melodies, and interesting harmonies. This piece is rightfully one of Alkan's most popular, slower, less difficult pieces, and for good reason. If you haven't played it, you should give it a read. I personally own a hard copy of the now out-of-print Masters Music reprint edition, which is just a reprint of the Delaborde Biodot version of the first 3 Nocturnes. It includes the 2 Nocturnes Opus 57, which are the second and third Nocturne, but not Le Grillon, the Cricket, also marked the 4th Nocturne and Opus 60 bis. Not just Opus 60, those are 2 different pieces, specifically Opus 60 bis. I don't want to put the other 3 Nocturnes down, but the first Nocturne, Opus 22, clearly stands head and shoulders above the others. So what are you waiting for? Go give this Nocturne a play, and seriously consider adding it to your repertoire. It will be a hit with your audiences and inspire curiosity and further discussion. This has always been the case for me the many times I have performed this piece. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Discussing Alkan, and thank you for waiting very patiently since this episode took much longer than I originally expected to finish. I wanted to make the visuals as understandable as I could, since I was geeking out quite a lot about specific details in the score, and that took a while for me, as this video ended up being much longer and much more advanced than the others I have made. However, I really enjoyed analyzing this piece in detail, and I think it deserves a decent discussion, as well as being played a lot more, of course. No promises about when exactly the next episode will be uploaded, but it likely won't be as complex or long as this one. Or maybe it will. We will see. I'll see you next time.